Gathered friends, welcome to Bionicle Fanon Reviews, the show where I build, review, and showcase every single one of the fan-created, canonized Bionicle models over the entirety of Bionicle Generation 1's 10-year run. In 2005, the LEGO Group officially hosted Dark Hunter and Rahi canon contests, showcasing fan mocks in official media like books. Even moving onwards all the way up to 2010, fan websites like BZ Power continued to host canon contests, enriching the world of Bionicle with new depictions, artwork, and builds. And even now, there's been a renaissance of canon contests. Thanks to TTV and sponsored by Greg Farshty, the original scribe of Bionicle, we have modern canonization contests depicting characters that we never thought would see the light of day and are still ongoing right now. Now, throughout the show, it is my own goal to own, build, review, and showcase every single fan-created canonized model created for Bionicle, and share these reviews with all of you. And while we mostly stick to canon models, there are a few rare exceptions which shine through. Fan mocks depicting their versions of Bionicle characters, canon or otherwise, that are so exemplary that they deserve a review of their own. For every Bionicle Fanon review, I rank the builds by 4 key points. Number 1 is posability. Can the model get in good poses? Can it support its own weight? And can it hold the weight of its own weapons, or is it just falling over? Number 2 is building techniques. Is the model just regurgitating stuff from existing LEGO sets, or is it trying something new and doing that well as using unique parts usages? Number 3 is overall aesthetics. How good does the model look completely agnostic of storyline relevance, and is it generally aesthetically appealing? And finally, number 4 is believability in universe, which means that does the storyline given to the model by the Bionicle story team make sense given how the model is built, and does the model scale well next to some representative samples from the Bionicle universe? And with that, let's consider these 4 points and more as we jump into a brief story and lore explanation of today's featured build. Alright, so for today's featured Bionicle Fanon review, we have Toa Bomanga. So the Toa Hagah in general were the elite guardians of Makuta Pterodax. They protected the Brotherhood of Makuta until eventually they realized that the Brotherhood of Makuta is actually pretty bad news. So they went ahead and stole the Kanohi Avoki, the Mask of Light, from them, but in the process were mutated into shrunken, misshapen Rahaga forms by Rudaka's Rotuka launcher. Eventually, though, they got their old forms back, served as heroes, and actually played a pretty significant role in the later on parts of the storyline, but as of right now, this is Toa Bomanga in his prime Toa form. He wears the Kanohi Mask of Growth, which allows him to grow at a massive rate and expand his size to almost that of a Tatarak, so he basically is just Giant Man without the ability to become small because that's Norik's thing and not his. They split the powers of shrinking and growing for the Toa Hagah. So Bomanga got the power of growth, which kind of makes sense because again, he's a Toa of Earth, a very large hulking figure with the power to command the element of Earth as well. And with that, that's basically all you need to know about him. We can jump right into the review. Super excited for this one because I was very hyped to build the Toa Hagah. They're all finally here, so let's go. Alright, so here is the official canonized version of Toa Hagah Bomonga, a very, very interesting model that despite essentially being a Metru build, probably is one of the most different models on this list in terms of trying out new things and trying new building techniques, all to give this character a very interesting and distinct silhouette, and also to actually make him feel like a Toa of Earth, which I actually really appreciate. So I do want to get a few things out of the way first. First of all, in previous videos, a couple of people asked me if I could actually explain, first of all, how I 3D printed some of these pieces, as well as exactly what filament I used. The long and short of it is that I literally just went on Amazon and searched metal green PLA, which is the type of filament that I use for 3D printing the pieces, and picked the one that was closest to the official LEGO color of metal green, which is a little bit of a darker shade. It's not quite a brighter green or a bright metal green, it's a much more darker tone shade. I have linked the Amazon link for the filament in the description below, so if you do want to purchase the exact one, you can just go ahead and do that. In terms of how I exactly 3D printed the pieces, first of all, this piece right here is actually modeled by King Sidorak. Thankfully, he provided the piece for free, so anyone can 3D print the Hagah shield should they want to. I have linked that in the description below. The mask itself is a non-aquatic version of the Kanohi Faxon. Obviously, Bomonga's mask in-universe is not the Faxon, however, the Toa Hagah, as I mentioned in-universe, are using masks that are meant to honor past warriors, so they're shaped in the form of other Kanohi other than what their actual mask powers are. It's a little confusing, and it's really only there because of a mix-up between the LEGO story team and the LEGO set design team, but that's a whole nother story. But essentially this is supposed to be shaped like a Faxon if it looks familiar, but he of course has a completely different mask that allows him to grow to enormous sizes. This mask was modeled by prolific Bionicle 3D modeler Galva. I've included a link in the description below in case you want to 3D print the mask itself to the page on Thingiverse, so do go check that out and show him some love. In terms of all the other pieces, aka the Metru shoulder armor, the feet pieces here, as well as the Metru thigh armor here, I essentially just took the official 3D models or even the unofficial 3D models, which I found on Eldra, and I used a program called LDView, which is something I downloaded online. It essentially allows you to convert any eldra.dat file into an STL for 3D printing. I then exported the files as an STL and just printed them on my Prusa i3 Mark III's printer. So super simple. You can do it for basically any LEGO part that has a 3D model available online. Unfortunately, there is one other thing I do need to note here before we jump into the review. The sword here is not actually a 3D print. I actually had to spray paint this piece, and I do not have a ton of experience with spray painting, but I do think it turned out alright. Essentially, I just could not find the 3D model for this sword anywhere online, so I had to take the actual sword piece and just spray paint it with the closest color to metal green I could find by going to my nearest Home Depot and picking out the metal green color. It was a bit of work trying to color match it. It's not 100% right. Under certain lighting conditions, it does become obvious that this is a different color than this, and all of them are not exactly the exact metal green LEGO color, but for the purposes of the review and for my personal collection, I figured it honestly was the best I could do. And so, without further ado, with all of that out of the way, let's just now jump in and talk about the actual model. So as I mentioned, we're going to be going over 4 points. Starting off with number 1 is posability. So we're going to be starting from the legs and working our way up to the top. So this actually, obviously, as you can see, uses a pretty unorthodox building technique of using black Metru torsos as the lower legs here, as well as the lower arms, and we're going to get to that. What's really cool is that despite them feeling very bulky, there's even an inclusion of a bit of a Technic piece here to add a bit of bulk to it. You can still bend them exactly as you would want to bend any standard leg joint. You can have the full 90 degrees of motion, even a little bit more, through this leg here, which is something I really do appreciate, which means you can get this into all sorts of good poses. The feet, however, unfortunately cannot really rotate side to side without pulling them out of the axle. As you can see here, it really starts to pull out of the axle if you want to rotate the feet side to side, but you can kind of swivel them and move them back and forth like this, which really is honestly all you're probably going to need to get this into fairly good poses. There's a lot of different poses I can get this guy into without actually having to be worried about the feet falling out, and it's using all the right pieces to actually be posed totally well, so I'm not too concerned. All in all, it's a thing that I really do like, and we will be getting to building techniques later, but I just think it's really cool that they actually were able to get exactly the right amount of articulation from this type of piece. Moving upwards to the hands here, you'll notice that the upper arms are mounted indeed on ball joints, so you can actually just move them all around as you see fit. This ball joint is a little bit too weak for what you're going to do, and your mileage will vary. As you can see, he can't really hold up the weight of his arms here, but obviously this one's fine, so I think it's just a weak joint on my end. Not really sure what's going on there because there even is more weight on this side than this side. It's just something you have to keep an eye out for and maybe even change out these pieces if they're a little bit too weak for you. He also can obviously bend the elbow all sorts of different ways, and actually has a lot more articulation than most of the Toa Hagah, because the Toa Hagah original sets actually restricted the amount of articulation here. This one actually can just move pretty freely, so that's pretty nice. And he actually can move around his fingers as well. There's actually nothing attaching the staff piece here. You can see here it's literally just held on by friction. If you move the fingers open, he just lets go of the spear, which is not really that great of a technique for me personally. I would have preferred that this was actually attached on fairly well. However, it actually surprisingly works a lot better than you would expect it to, and I don't really have too many problems of him accidentally dropping the spear because the grip on the hands, as well as the interface with the tube pieces here, actually works out fairly well.
What's really nice is that you actually can bend the fingers back and forth, so you can really splay the fingers out, get them in all sorts of unique poses. Essentially, he's just using the massive axon-like hands here, except that he has 3 fingers, which I think works well for a Toa of Earth, and we will discuss that a little bit more when we get to aesthetics. Obviously, as you can see here, this staff is not falling out. I can really just shake him up. It actually stays in quite well, so I'm pretty happy with how that worked out. However, much like the other Toa Hagah, he actually has an action feature. Twisting this gear in the back, and let me just stabilize him here, allows you to actually move the arms back and forth as you would expect in a Toa Metru build, which is something that I think is really cool how they managed to actually include all of this movement and articulation plus a play function despite having this character be fully posable. And this is one of the best options you're going to get out of pretty much all the Toa Hagah, because first of all, you can move the arms on the ball joints here so you can really get them into whatever poses you like, but you can also have the action feature, so it's a great play feature to swing the arms back and forth, and it has friction, so they're not just going to be flopping around like the official sets. There actually was an attempt to add friction to the movement here. So all in all, some really great choices here made to increase the amount of articulation, as well as increase the overall amount of playability. And lastly, in terms of the head itself, you can see here that it's just mounted on a ball joint. Nothing too much you can say about this one. It's just kind of the standard range of articulation, and it's mounted really far forwards as he kind of is a Toa of Earth, which a lot of them in the past have had this hunchback-like appearance and a much shorter frame. And so, with that, we can move on from our first point, posability, and start to talk about the second point, which is building techniques. So building techniques, out of all the Toa Hagah, this one certainly is the most unique, and I can easily see why this one probably was one of the fan favorites among the voting rounds. It's because it's using a lot of really interesting building techniques and unorthodox building styles to depict a Toa of Earth like this, while still keeping within the official restrictions to actually make him a Toa Metru build, which he is, as you can see. One thing that I really do like is the usage of the multiple Black Toa Metru torsos, or the Whenua torsos. I know a lot of people have complained that this figure and a lot of people trying to recreate him has kind of tanked the prices of this particular piece on the aftermarket. They've kind of become ridiculously expensive because in order to make this, you need 5 of them. However, I do feel like this was kind of worth it because it really gives him a very distinct look and feel and silhouette, and it's a really cool building technique to actually use this large torso piece to make the character appear more bulky. Now, it's not everyone's favorite. I know it's a fairly controversial choice, but obviously this one was the winning / most popular voted model, so I understand that a lot of people do like it. One thing that personally I am not the biggest fan of is the way the shield is mounted, however. I wanted to point this out because this is the only Toa Hagah without a Rotuka launcher on the shield, which I think is kind of a missed opportunity, especially because there are multiple ways how they could have easily mounted a Rotuka spinner just underneath there, using very similar building techniques and still have it mounted the same way. Also, officially the shield was technically supposed to be held in the hands. For me personally, it's not a big deal, but obviously this is another difference he has compared to the other Toa Hagah. He is the only one with a shield mounted on the side of his hand versus having him actually be holding it. So there is that if you want to take that into account. The shield itself, however, is nicely positioned. You can pose it fairly well, and I do like the amount of articulation you can get out of it. I just think there could have been ways to actually integrate the Rotuka launcher here to really make it such that he can fire a Rotuka launcher much like all of the other Toa Hagah, as well as probably found out a way to mount it on the hands as well, which I would have preferred to at least keep him more uniform with the rest of the team. However, it is not a major deal, and we can move on to the rest of the building techniques. One thing I do also want to note about the torso construction here is that there's actually a few clever pieces being used. It's not just a standard Metru build, but there's a lot of really compact Technic building here. You can see one of the 90-degree newer style of Technic axles being used right here, with the Metru armor piece on the top to really actually add the extra bit of armoring and the extra bit of color to the top here. It does make the head stick out really far, and to be honest, not quite sure how I feel about that. I probably would prefer it if there was some way to move it a little bit closer to the body, but I understand the want to actually make a Toa of Earth have this hunchbacked appearance, so I can kind of forgive it in that sense. All in all, I'm pretty happy with how the building techniques worked out for this model. I love the way the lower limbs are constructed. Again, fairly controversial, but I do actually think it works out quite well for a Toa of Earth. And besides a few minor things with the shield that I wish were just a little bit more uniform with the rest of the team, this is all in all very, very well done in terms of building techniques. And with that, we can move on to point number 3, which is going to be overall aesthetics. So aesthetically speaking, this really gets the point across as some sort of a hunchbacked-like character. You can really tell that this character is immensely strong by just looking at how large the hands are, how large the lower legs are. It almost feels kind of comical to have him be holding a spear so skinny and with a very, very pointed end, but all the Toa Hagah have spears like this, so I guess it does make sense. Maybe could have used a slightly bulkier spear tip to really drive home the point that this is a brawler-like character, a really large and muscular one, but I do appreciate the use of this particular spear tip because I do think the aesthetics fit in quite well, at least compared to the rest of the Toa Hagah. Moving on backwards, I also like how the builder actually intended to shrink the height of the character here, positioning the pelvis piece all the way upwards to really shorten the height of the Metru torso. It does make it have somewhat comical proportions, but for Bionicle, I think it works very well, and they definitely do not have human-like proportions all in all for pretty much all these set characters either, so this one makes a lot of sense to me. Aesthetically speaking, the only thing that kind of bugs me a little bit is that how on certain angles the head feels like it really sticks out almost a little too far. If you look at it, say this particular angle here, it really just looks like the head is just mounted really, really forwards compared to the rest of the body. Maybe this could have been solved by having some more bulk go here, or maybe it could have been solved by having the head be mounted up here instead of right out at an angle there. That being said, again, it definitely does add to the hunchback-like appearance. I just think maybe it's out a little bit too far, but that's just my opinion. Honestly, that is really the only complaint I have aesthetically speaking. Everything else is really great about this model, and now we can move on to taking a look at how it compares to some representative samples in the Bionicle universe. And to do so, I've brought alongside a few different samples. First of all, let's take a look at the actual official Toa Hagah, Toa Norik, and Toa Iruni. I also wanted to bring along his Rahaga form here, which doesn't really do much in terms of size comparisons, but given that they are the same character, I just felt like it was appropriate to include in this video. So immediately, as you can see, one of the Toa Hagah standing at pretty much full height is a lot taller than Bomanga here, but you can also still clearly see they're supposed to be clearly in the same team. Obviously, they're all using these spears here. Really, the only difference is that Bomanga is using the Technic tube pieces to kind of add some bulk to his spear and make it a little bit easier for him to clutch it with his hands, which I do understand, but it does make the spear look just slightly thicker than everyone else's. Obviously, the Hagah shield is exactly the same, minus the Rotuka launcher, which is absent here, and all in all, it does feel like this is, albeit a very unorthodox build, still part of the Toa Hagah team. He's got his spear, he's got the shield, he's got the metallic color scheme, and the Metru build making up the most of the torso, which I really appreciate, because despite how different this takes the standard Metru build, it still is very obviously part of the Toa Hagah team. And so, with point number 4, believability in universe quickly summarized, let's now take a step back and rank this model on all 4 points of my review scale. So starting off with point number 1, posability, I honestly think this is probably one of the best of the canon Toa Hagah models. He has the gear function articulation, so you can get a lot of fun action poses out of it, but you can also obviously move the arms on ball joints, so you can get really good poses while making it still fully playable. There's nothing actually restricting the articulation. I was initially worried about the amount of articulation in the legs here, but obviously I was worried for nothing because you can articulate these the full range, if not even more than usual. I'm very happy in general with how many different poses you can get out of this character. Really say have him be holding his spear up in victory, have him be bracing himself for an attack, all sorts of different poses being made out of this character that still managed to pack in a play function with articulation. Really, the only complaint here is that, for one, you cannot actually move the feet side to side like this. You can move them in a circular motion or back and forth, but not side to side. Not really sure how they could have fixed that other than lengthening the axle somewhat, which would have taken away from the aesthetics, so it's not a huge deal to me, just something I do want to point out, and all in all, I think that I'm very happy in general. The weakness of this particular ball joint I suspect is due to my personal pieces and not because of a weakness in the design, so I'm going to let that one slide for now, and I'm going to give Posability a 9 out of 10, nearly a perfect score. This to me is what makes a Bionicle, well, a Bionicle, or at least a perfect form of articulation. You've got full articulation on the elbows and the arms, you can really get them into different poses, but you also have a play feature with a gear function with friction, and that is basically perfect to me. That's why I liked the G2 Bionicle Toa so much. They had basically this amount of articulation with the friction gear function. So major props to the model for including this. Moving onwards to point number 2, which was building techniques. In general, I'm pretty happy with the building techniques, some really great parts usages of the Metru torsos being used as the actual lower arms and lower legs here. The shield could have been a little bit improved by the way it's attached. The builder very easily could have integrated a Rotuka launcher by just using a slightly different type of Technic pin. Instead of using this particular pin, which uses a pinhole, they could have used the axle version of this, attach it to the Rotuka launcher, and you would have been good to go. It would have been mounted exactly the same way. So that's a bit of a miss for me not having the Rotuka launcher here, which does set it apart from the rest of the Hagah. And the only other thing is, as I mentioned, the neck is a little bit far out, but that's more of an aesthetics thing than a building techniques thing, because overall the rest of the building techniques are really good. And so I'm going to give it a score of 8 out of 10 in terms of the building techniques. Moving on to point number 3, general aesthetics. Again, very happy with how this looks. I really do like the metallic green color. I know it's a fairly controversial one, but I am a big fan of how earthy it is. It again really evokes a Toa of Earth with this especially darker green color. I think if the green was any lighter, I probably would have been not the biggest fan. It probably would have looked too much like a Toa of Air, but this darker metallic shade of green, which is LEGO's official metal green color, really works quite well for this model. And all in all, I'm very happy with the overall aesthetics. Very strong proportions, are fairly cartoonish, but also give him a very distinctive silhouette. And the only thing that I will complain about is just how far forwards the neck is. And so, I'm going to give overall aesthetics an 8 out of 10 overall, with just a couple of points being taken away for the neck here. Maybe 8.5, the points don't really matter to be honest. And finally, going on to our last point here, taking a look at the general believability in universe. Despite this being a very radically different build than most of the other Toa Hagah Metru builds, it absolutely succeeds with what it's trying to do. It really is a very well-formed, cohesive model, and for that, I'm going to give the believability in universe a 10 out of 10. I believe this is a member of the Toa Hagah. The spear, the shield, the overall build, everything fits in very well with his teammates here, and I am very happy with how well this worked out. But with that, we have summed up our review of Toa Bomanga. And before we end here, there's just one final thing I do have to discuss. For those of you who do not know, I actually record all of my videos, whether they be Bionicle fan reviews or otherwise, months and months in advance. In fact, if you take a look at my video schedule here, here's a list of all the videos that are literally completely done. They are edited, they are on YouTube, just ready to be uploaded. And this list goes up until around June. The reason why I do this is because I don't actually have a ton of free time during the week to actually make videos. So I take advantage of times where I have a large chunk of free time and just churn out video after video. I film all my intros and outros at one time, and then I do all the content at one time and all the recording. And the reason why I bring this all up is that I wanted to officially make the announcement that Bionicle Fan & Reviews, which has been a weekly series since September of 2020, every single week we've had a new Bionicle Fan & Review, will be moving to a bi-weekly series. And there's a number of reasons behind this decision. I figured that this was a good video to kind of make this announcement because it will be the first video where next week we will not have a Bionicle Fan & Review. The reason for this is because, to be quite frank, Bionicle Fan & Reviews are among the worst performing videos on my channel. Other than a few outliers like stuff like canon contest relevant stuff like this, it seems like there's not a lot of interest in seeing me review all of the canonized Bionicle models, or at least seeing me review them weekly. Obviously, since I promised when I started off to review every single one, I will still be reviewing every single one. And don't worry, there's a lot of more mock reviews coming too. I will try to make every Monday some sort of a mock review, whether it be Bionicle or otherwise. But in terms of the Bionicle Fan & Reviews, which are either the canonized Bionicle models or the non-canon ones that I just wanted to review others' mocks, those will be moving to a bi-weekly schedule to make more room for other videos that I feel are maybe a little bit more time relevant and might have a little bit more interest interest to the general audience. I hope this is all okay with you. Do let me know what you think of this change in the comments below. Are you happy that every week you're going to be seeing something a little bit different and not every week after week Bionicle fan and review? Or do you wish that it would go back to a weekly series? And I'll do my best to accommodate based on where I generally see the comments trending. With that though, thank you so much for tuning into this video. I do hope you enjoyed this review of the Toa Hagah Bomonga model, a really fun and interesting model, and one of the most interesting Toa Hagah builds. And stay tuned because in 2 weeks we'll be taking a look at Toa Hagah Gaki, which you can see right here, another very interesting model with a completely different color scheme. These are all spray painted, and this one easily was one of the hardest ones for me to get done, so do stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoyed this review, and thank you all for subscribing to DuckBricks for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Thanks so much, and bye bye for now.